joining us and your consistent attendance. We definitely appreciate that. You guys know Caitlin. Phoebe Boynton, costume designer, originally from Ithaca, New York. She's currently based out of the Theatreworks Costume Shop. She has her bachelor's in art history from Cornell University and an MFA in theater design and technology from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And she's also an adjunct professor at Chadron State. So welcome, Phoebe. Thank you for joining us. Al and John, thank you both for being a part of the Director's Circle. And I think Caitlin had some updates on fall programming that we're excited to share. And then we're excited to talk about behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah. So thanks, Al and John. Thanks, Phoebe and Bo, for joining us. So this morning, since Phoebe is a designer, we'll start off with our usual chat, and then we have some sort of show and tell that we're going to do as well. So we have some images of Phoebe's work as a costume designer at Theatreworks. So I want to highlight that Phoebe has a long history before we were lucky enough to snag her here in Colorado Springs. And as you may have heard in Bo's intro, that Phoebe is currently an adjunct professor at Chadron State College in Nebraska. So just because Phoebe is residing here at Colorado Springs with Theatreworks doesn't mean that she's not still teaching and designing all over the country in what spare time she can carve out. And although, you know, I sense we all have a little bit more spare time right now. So I wanted to start by asking Phoebe something that I asked Amy Jo last week. I'm always curious about people's origin stories in the theater, because I think that theater artists come to the theater in many different ways. So Phoebe, I was hoping you could tell us about how you came to be a theater person and a costume designer specifically.
For sure. I was lucky enough to kind of start in theater in middle school. I was a very tiny child musical theater actor. And ended up in The Sound of Music as one of the Von Trapp children. And if you've ever seen that show, you know every time the Von Trapp children leave the stage, they come back on in a different costume, which was the first time I'd had any experience with anything so intense on stage, and I was much more interested in all the different costume changes and how those worked, and the idea of, oh, the little girls in the party scene are in little white dresses with blue satin sashes, and that's a connection to the text, and my little 12-year-old brain kind of exploded. And I started showing up at the costume shop. Ithaca is lucky enough to have its own summer theater, the Hangar Theater. I started volunteering there, and from that point on, I was a lost cause. So I worked in local theater, I worked in regional theater. By the time I finished high school, I was ready to take a break and do something serious for college. So I started my degree in art history at Cornell, and just was desperately missing the theater. So started showing up to their theater department, and after that, after I graduated, I started working for the Utah Symphony and Opera, and then came back to Cornell and went to graduate school, and ended up in Los Angeles for 10 years doing film and television and opera. So before, freelancing and showing up here. So short story.
Love it. You're. I'm curious about so many things. One of the things that I'm going to spring on you is one of the workplaces that you didn't mention, but that I am always delighted to hear stories about when we talk together, is your time designing on a cruise ship. Will you talk about what that was like, how cruise ship design is unlike other design? And I will spare John and Al some of the cruise ship horror story. But what was maybe the most surprising, in addition to cruise ship design and how it's different, what was maybe one of the most surprising things about life on a ship?
Oh, man. So I ended up with Norwegian Cruise Lines around 2014. I was on one of their ships in the Mediterranean. And it was kind of a last minute thing. They'd had a wardrobe supervisor break her arm and had to get disembarked. And so they called me up. They said, we're shipping you out to Barcelona. They got me on a plane, and within the span of 48 hours, I went from like living my little life in Los Angeles to being on a ship in the middle of the Mediterranean. One of the things that surprised me most, like a cruise ship entertainer, like it feels light and fluffy, it's big, it's energetic, it's, you know, very commercial theater. It's supposed to appeal to a wide range of audiences. It's supposed to fit nicely in between, you know, drinks and dinner. And yet the people who come to cruise ships have such a variety of backgrounds and take their craft incredibly seriously. So kind of trying to carve out a space for yourself on a cruise ship where you've got, you know, just this much space to warm up, to make sure that all the dancers are in peak physical condition, to do all the laundry, to do all the mending, to kind of make sure you have everything for every possible iteration of things that could go wrong kind of packed into a tiny little closet so you can pull them out. Because when you're, you know, halfway between the Canary Islands and Madeira, you can't just like run out to Walmart for an extra pair of pantyhose. So just that planning for 6 months of unforeseen circumstance was kind of a wonderful discovery and a wonderful skill to discover that I didn't know I had. The other really interesting thing is all of the cruise ship performers and the people who work backstage, that's really only half of their job. All the people who work on a cruise ship are also, their primary responsibility is the safety on the cruise ship. So you have to go through extensive safety training. They sent me to train at a Coast Guard facility in Maryland for a week, in between two of my contracts, to do, you know, how to maintain a lifeboat. What are safety protocols for a ship? What do you do if there's a fire? We were on a firefighting training facility as well. We did, you know, crawling around in the dark in full gear. So all of those tiny little dancers who you see running around on a ship are also capable of like swimming several laps in a pool and then hauling you into a life raft. So which is one of the kind of attrition points between when people get cast or hired for a cruise ship and when they actually get on the ship, is you have to go through this very extensive training. And if you can't pass, they can't take you on the ship, which is insane. I mean, you have people at the top of their professional game who like, oh no, if you can't swim, like, you're not coming on.
I mean, I appreciate that the standards are that rigorous. That's surprising. I feel also like those of you who aren't in theater don't know that an actor's resume looks different than a traditional resume, which one might submit for a job. And often one of the most delightful parts of an actor's resume along the bottom are a list of special skills, which include everything from someone who can drive a stick shift car, which is a special skill in this day and age, to someone who can speak French, or I once saw one can do the entire alphabet backwards as a dinosaur. But I'm imagining that that training provides cruise ship actors with some exciting special skills that they can put at the bottom of their resume. I love it. Before I ask you some questions about your Theatreworks specific designs and show some process work, I'm interested about when you moved to Los Angeles and you said that you did a lot of work in film. What are some of the differences between the work that you do costume designing for film and how you think about costume designing in theater?
I mean, so costume designing in theater, you design for 360 degrees. You see a whole person, and you design for a certain amount of rigorous use. When someone's on stage, their main focus is on their performance, and you don't want them to worry about like kicking out a hem or like or you know, my hat's gonna fall off. Whereas with film, you are able to control the point of view much more specifically. So most of film, and especially television, is shot, you know, like a zoom shot. You see people from the shoulders up. So, and you see a great deal of detail from the shoulders up. So you want to spend your kind of visual energy and dollar in that space. Whereas you will almost never see shoes except for in a cutaway shot when you're working in film. People have to have shoes, but for the most part, like, they're standing on apple boxes to make sure that the right height, everything, so that everything lines up, or they look like they're the same height as the person next to them. So there's a lot of hidden jiggery pokery in film that you don't always get to see. The other thing that really surprised me about film that I should have thought of that I never did until I started working in film is brand logos. For the most part in theater, you know, you can put someone in a Nike sweatshirt or something that has a brand name on it, whereas you cannot in film without clearance from a company. You cannot use someone's images, a copyrighted image, without clearance. And so learning how to, and it's called Greeking out copyrighted images in film, is a skill that you will use over and over again, changing, you know, a logo on someone's hat so that it's just different enough to make it an original work that you don't have to send through legal clearance before it goes on screen. And it's one of my favorite things to do when I watch television now, is to notice when you see a branded logo, because that means that that company has cleared that logo to be on screen, or to see how someone has changed a copyrighted image to make it one of their own. And so one of the things that I got to do when I was working in film and television is to work with artists to create original, like, t-shirt screen prints or original designs that we could put into film and television, which was really a lot of fun and not something that I necessarily expected to kind of jump into. So
I'm so curious now about about like the spelling and etymology of Greeking.
I think it has to do with the phrase "it's Greek to me." So, as in, it's changed enough that like you cannot intelligibly understand it.
Oh, I love that. Bo asked in the chat. Bo's using the chat feature. He's doing some next level zooming. Whether we could give an example of what to look for on something that has been changed on film.
Like on the logo stuff specifically, or like maybe something that you've noticed like on television recently that you're like, oh, they totally changed that for this production.
For the most part, when you work in film and television, you want to make it as unobtrusive as possible. And often you will get other people behind the camera being like, oh, I can see, you know, X, Y, and Z. The one that I see show up most is, especially when you do cutaway shots of people running, is the brand name on the bottom of sneakers, because it's almost impossible to change. And shoes have logos all over them. You know, they have, you know, 5 to 7 logos all over shoes. So oftentimes they'll get missed, or you'll see just like a piece of tape over, you know, an Adidas stripe to make it like 3 black stripes and a red stripe. So, yeah. The other fun thing to do is to, when you see a crowd scene, especially if you don't necessarily need to pay attention to the foreground, is to kind of like count through all the background characters and who they are, because oftentimes when you're working on larger productions, you're processing, you know, 300 to 500 background people a day, and they'll come with options, and you'll come with like a rack of options, and you have to design them very quickly. You have to process, you know, these people through wardrobe in, you know, an hour or 2 hours. to get them on camera. And they're not always going to be on camera. You don't know if they're going to be, you know, in a waist up shot. And so seeing the interesting things that show up in the background that people don't think are going to be noticed is just one of my favorite hobbies. There's some really wonderful things that show up in the background.
I love it. And especially I hear in that you using both your designer brain, but then also, you know, your job as costume shop manager is a job in which you're not only doing your own designs, you're also supporting the design work of other folks. So that attention to detail and that editing, that, you know, I feel like you're still honing it by watching television and catching these details.
For sure.
And later I might, depending on, you know, what other folks want to talk about, I might ask you a little bit about costume shop managing, but let's like stay in the world of design for a little bit.
For sure.
I'm going to try and show a picture. So we'll look at Christmas Carol for a second, which was Phoebe's first show with us. And I'm interested, and it doesn't just have to be about Christmas Carol, but I'm thinking about how Christmas Carol in its own way contains like iconic looks, like they're especially for the Ebenezer Scrooge character. And when I think about that, and when I think about also, you mentioned Sound of Music, which is a show that you mentioned being very formative. I don't know whether you've had a chance to design it. Have you?
I have.
Good. Here's a picture, a really flattering picture. Can everybody see it? Yeah. Of Lisa Wolpe in Christmas Carol. So I'm thinking about how like Scrooge is, you know, the cap and the dressing gown is either very specifically in the text or like in every single production of A Christmas Carol I've ever seen. And with the Von Trapp family, there are certain like very iconic looks for Sound of Music. So how do you as a designer think about balancing your own aesthetic interests and the needs of the story? And then when there might be, in this specific example, when there might be really clear expectations that an audience has about like what this character needs to look like.
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult question. First and foremost, you need to make sure that the costumes suit the production and the actors. Mm-hmm. I mean, before you get off on your, you know, this is my idea for the costumes, unless it serves the entire production, it's not going to be a successful design. So if you're going to jump off into that, like, I'm going to do everything in hot pink, there has to be a way to make that supported, mm-hmm. And not take away from the rest of the story. So yes, creating something like the Von Trapp children's curtain clothes. Yes, curtains can be anything, but it means you also have to collaborate with the scenic designer to make sure the curtains that show up match the curtains that are in Maria Von Trapp's bedroom, and have to match the rest of the scenic design. Mm-hmm. And like with Ebenezer Scrooge, yes, you need to convey the character in such a way that is supported by the text and also going to support the actor in their performance, so they don't need to act around the costume, that the costume is there to support them. And that's one of the places that I love to live in costume design, is creating things that the performers can live in, that the performers feel will support their art, will create a better production on stage, as opposed to costumes that wear the actor, mm-hmm. which is, I mean, always enticing as a costume designer. You want to feel like your voice is heard as an artist, but ultimately, I don't go on stage. I am there to support the people who are on stage. So
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, and from what I remember, Lisa Volpe, as an actor who had like a lifelong tradition of performing across gender, had like very specific ideas about what helped her get
For
into
sure.
the character. Yeah.
And that was really wonderful in that she was able to come to costume fittings and come to this collaboration with a very clear idea of what she needed, but aesthetically she was very open to kind of my, taking this to a place that spoke to my art, I guess. And so when we custom built this dressing gown, and it's a really beautiful, rich pattern, but it's also a cotton corduroy. So it feels wealthy, but it also has a certain like stinginess to it that was really, spoke to me, which is why I chose it. And also I think looked really beautiful on stage. It caught the light really beautifully. It moved really nicely. And also it didn't have, because Scrooge is supposed to be very wealthy, but also miserly, which is, a central tenet of that story. And that was kind of how I was able to express my vision of what that meant, without getting in Lisa's way. So.
Love it. Oh, we're back. And, so what do we want to, speaking of use, before we go through like the whole process with something like 80 days, I'm thinking of a moment of use that's a bit sillier. So Phoebe's second show with Theatreworks, and we're getting like the tour of this is your Theatreworks design life. And I hope this will work. So I want to share one of my favorite costuming sequences in Little Shop of Horrors, which Phoebe costume designed as well, is this one. Great. And so, yeah, can we see this? So specifically, so Phoebe, do you want to give context for this moment in the show before we look at the three looks?
For sure. It's a moment where our main character Seymour is being tempted into his, tempted to his destruction. And that is that he is being offered money by multiple characters to support his plant that has been murdering people. And so there are the three characters of temptation who come through and offer him money and fame and prestige, and these three characters are all played by the same performer, Kevin, who you see here, increasingly offering him more ridiculous and lavish things to keep him on this path to his doom, basically. And this production was very, like, we tried to make it feel kind of oily and slick and sleazy, and Kevin was just such a wonderful human being and such a game human being in just like, let's take it to its logical extreme. So this one, I believe, was the television agent, or maybe the book agent.
I think this was the booking agent.
The booking agent.
I think this one was the television agent.
Yes. And all of these changes happen over the course of seconds. So he walks off on one side of the stage and walks right back on as the next character. So it's
speaking of the next character.
There he is. Which Nathan and I talked about, wanted to feel like a South Florida used car salesman was the inspiration. And changing the silhouette, changing the character to make sure that every time he came on, it felt like a visual break. It felt like a shock that, like, oh, it is the same person coming back on. We recognize Kevin, but also he is totally different. So the fat pad for this was sewn into the shirt, so it all went on as one piece. And he's, let's see, I think we made those pants elastic waist so he could just step right into them. And we had dressers on either side of the stage who would just like shuck all of his clothes off while he put the next thing on. And it was as choreographed off stage as it was on stage. And while he is doing these 3 quick changes, we also have the 3 urchins who are changing on the opposite side of the stage from him through into increasingly lavish costumes to kind of illustrate the way Seymour's world is changing. So,
I wish I had grabbed the photos of the urchins also doing their change at the same time. That sequence was very challenging.
Yeah, so we had, about the size of a 5x5 square backstage on either side, in which people are flailing and hurling wigs, and and as soon as they come on stage, the wardrobe crew would clear those costumes and set up the next change, which was coming right off stage. We had a really, really game wardrobe crew who learned a lot very quickly.
Yeah, it was amazing because so many of them were students to watch their learning curve over the course of the show, from the technical rehearsals to the final performance. Just how fleet they became and how confident with the changes.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard for a person who's newer to theater to realize that their role in this moment really is to just grab a dress at the shoulders and just yoink it down the length of a person's entire body. And like, that is the way that you show generosity and kindness, is by being as forceful as possible.
Right.
Yeah. I'm really excited to show just a bit before then we have questions if Al and John want to talk about anything in particular, to show a little bit more of your full process for Around the World in 80 Days, the most recent show that you designed, which is interesting. It wasn't until I was putting this together that I was like, oh, Christmas Carol and 80 Days are not that different from each other time-wise, period-wise, but they're so very different in the worlds that they explore and the worlds that you created, which was like, I just hadn't connected those two. Although I was noticing that you, Pheobe Boynton, have seemingly a passion for pattern.
Yes, for sure.
I love that. Okay, so we'll start actually. I'm going to share screen and I'm going to share my screen. And is this going okay? Can I get a thumbs up? Are you seeing it? Once I share with you, it just gives me a black void, which,
Terrifying.
Terrifying. But I'm actually going to start with Pinterest. And Al and John and Bo, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with Pinterest. What is this piece of internet technology, Phoebe?
So it's a visual pinboard. So you can take images from all over the internet and you can organize them into ideas. And it's really wonderful in that I was able to share it with the director and the other designers, to just kind of give them an idea of where I was in my process, in spite of the fact that they were all over the country. So we could explore this process kind of from a very early date. And it let us kind of dive more deeply into the visual world. And so I was able to organize, I started with very broad boards of like, this is specific period research, this is kind of tonal and color research, and then started to break it down into more specific characters. But I really wanted the world to feel bright and vivid and exciting in a way that that you wouldn't necessarily think of from a strict period piece.
Mm-hmm.
And we took a lot of liberties with the period in order to make it feel vibrant and necessary and like something that you wanted to dive into. This is not, a polite, reserved sort of piece. This is high energy, and these characters are big and broad, and they have to make an impact if they're only going to be on stage for 10 to 30 seconds. So you have to illustrate the world quickly. But it was also really wonderful because this period, the 1880s, is kind of the advent of photography. All of a sudden, photography becomes portable and a lot faster. So you've got a lot of really exciting and interesting photographic evidence of the period from all over the world, from all sorts of backgrounds. You have a certain accessibility of art that you didn't have in earlier periods. So I was able to find some really exciting research just as I was going through.
One of the things that I think is really exciting about your historical research, and this is, Al and John, and but one of the things that's a constant conversation in theater, as in the rest of our country, is about representation, especially of people of color. And as people of color are cast in and telling stories that are traditionally associated with sort of white or European history, that one of the things that needs to shift is not only the casting, but then also how those stories are even represented internally. So a lot of times, and this has been an area of discussion in the arts, that if a Black actor is cast in a period piece, that they might go into a room and see an inspiration board that a costume designer has put together. And though they themselves as a Black actor will be wearing those costumes, that they may not see themselves represented in any of the especially the photographic or historical research that a designer has done. And something that I really admire about Phoebe's research is that knowing that this was a project that would have an incredibly diverse cast, and Phoebe can also speak to this herself, that she made sure that not only the contemporary research but also the historical research reminded the cast members could all see themselves in it, and that we were reminded that people of color were not invented to sort of steal words from Phoebe in 1964, right? That they've been a vibrant part of history throughout. And so that's something that that I think is really unfortunately exceptional in the sense of an exception about Phoebe's research, and I really admire about her work on this particular project.
Thanks. Yeah, it is always been kind of something that I have been interested in, especially coming from an art history background, is kind of who gets represented in art and how do you see the world beyond the portraits of the king or the portraits of the very wealthy and powerful. And one of the exciting things about doing research for this project was really delving into kind of the art of the period and how do we look at the art of the period through the lens of a modern eye and make it representative of our world now. This is going to sound so goofy. I am a huge fan of Doctor Who, which is a British television show about a time traveler. And the original Doctor Who, they go back to other planets and past times, and you see everyone looks very white and very, a running gag of how cheap the production value is. But if you go to the more recent Doctor Who, they do make a very conscious decision to recognize that past times, other cultures, and even reflected across other planets, is creating a very vibrant and inclusive array of characters, of people who populate, you know, all of time and space. And that was something that kind of was always ticking over in the back of my head, is like, oh, of course we would do it like this. So.
And I've clicked on one of your rough sketches. So Phoebe has arranged her Pinterest, which is public, so y'all can feel free to invite everyone to your Pinterest party, Phoebe. This is a rougher sketch that you've done for a traveling costume for the character of
Auda, yeah.
And where does this fall in your process?
So my process tends to start with, you know, initial conversations with the director, reading the script, making notes, going to kind of big ideas of period and color and intention, and then to more specific research, and then all of these kind of points are points at which you want to check in with your collaborators, with your director, with your the rest of your designers. And then into rough sketches. Rough sketches are usually more helpful for me because I can kind of see what's going on so far as shape and character. But people tend to react more strongly and more with more kind of upfront feedback once they get colors in. So you do a rough sketch, and I like to put little notes, so as I'm drawing, if I come up with ideas or, you know, process things or things that need to happen on stage, those can get communicated. And then I'll paint them in, and then I'll start kind of sourcing things, see what we have in stock, see what, you know, exists about the internet, see what other theaters have nearby. This particular traveling outfit, we had a jacket and a skirt in stock that were similar, and we ended up, and then we built the bustle. I think we borrowed the muff from the Fine Arts Center, and then I built several iterations of the hat. I spent about a year as a milliner building hats, and so I get weirdly picky about my hats. So she went through several iterations of that little
and I can scan through for a second. This is slightly less elegant, but you get a slideshow of different 80 Days looks.
Yeah, so that was the initial hat that we went with for her, and it just wasn't suiting the character, and so I ended up building a tiny little blue and purple beaded fascinator that was sparkly and tiny and just like the perfect cherry on that sundae. So, which I don't know if I have any photos of. Sad.
Right, that's the thing about when the photos get taken, there's a balance between the artist and the design, and then getting really great photos out for press. So we take our photos.
Second dress. It's that after
Tuesday?
Tech Weekend. Yeah.
The Tuesday, and then we don't technically open till Friday. So they're definitely.
I was for sure remaking that hat until Thursday. Although that hat landed, it was the wedding hat at the end that kept changing over. So at the end, she comes back. She's back in her traveling suit, but she's changed into a little white hat with a veil, and it's very charming.
Yeah.
And Rasika was wonderful, as I kept coming in with more and more. Well, here, try this on. So she was incredibly generous in and patient in that process. But
I feel like maybe there's so many. I have like 8 million other photos from 80 Days that we could share. But I'll pause for a second and John and Al and Bo, are there questions, things that you're meditating on or observing that you want to share?
I have a question, but I have a comment first. Phoebe, I want to say your costumes designs are just amazing.
Thank you.
Ever since Christmas Carol, and I know that we had to cut the budget fairly significantly. And
Phoebe, John's on the finance committee, so he knows all about the budget cuts.
But the end product was just, I mean, it was mind-boggling. So congratulations on that. So I do have a question, and Caitlin kind of squashed this at the beginning, but I would like to hear one or two cruise ship horror stories.
Oh, golly. I mean, it ranges from everything from, when I was working for Oceana, which is a subsidiary of Norwegian, we had a dancer. Usually we run the show the afternoon before to make sure all the tech elements are in place, to make sure everyone's still clear on choreography, to make sure, everything's in the right place. And it's just a form of rehearsal, keeping things fresh. We had a dancer go out with a twisted ankle about a half an hour before the show. And so up until the curtain came up on our first show that night, we were just rehearsing things on stage, rearranging how all the dancers were, rearranging tracks to make sure all the characters were in the right place. And so far as like performance horror stories, that was one of the most stressful. We've also, because most cruise ship shows have smoke or fog, and fire is a big deal on cruise ships. So all of the smoke detectors are very, very sensitive. So before a show, a stage manager will call up to the bridge and say, hey, you're going to get an alarm from the theater. We've got a show. We've got smoke. And I've definitely been at a show where they forgot to call. So we had, the fire team show up, and they're like, you've got a show on. And, turn around and went back. So that was always exciting. Doing ships or shows in rocky seas. There's nothing like seeing an aerialist, because we also, had silks that would come down from the Raptors to do their entire show as the ship is going like this. They are incredibly skilled human beings to do the things that we do. Seeing dancers perform while they're seasick, disaster. Yeah. So I guess those are the big kind of performance-based horror stories. There are also horror stories of like, we were put into code red for norovirus for 2 weeks. We got quarantined into the port of Miami and weren't allowed to do anything, which was just like, oh, this is awful. And everything smelled of chlorine and bleach, and it was just a mess. But a good preparation for constantly washing your hands and not touching high contact areas. So I guess that's a good thing.
Thank you.
Well, I've got a comment as well as a question. The comment, first of all, is just, well, thank you to you both, Caitlin and Phoebe especially, for sharing another piece of what it is that creates the magic of theater that we all so enjoy. I mean, it starts with the work itself, the sound, the lighting, the set design, the props, the costuming. And I think hearing this kind of detail from you will help me the next time we're in a theater space to pay even more attention to those details. And I think certainly something that we here in Colorado Springs can celebrate is that it's characteristic of the work of Theatreworks, whatever the budget may be, to attend to these details that makes the experience of live theater so extraordinary. And so thank you for the work that you've done on our behalf, Phoebe, and we look forward to seeing more of your work on the stage in the future. Probably one of those silly, obvious questions, and you've designed now for both film and television, but also live theater. So kind of a two-part question. Do you prefer one over the other? I'm hoping the answer is going to be live theater. And then is there a favorite show or bit of work that you've done that there was something about it that you'll just never forget and that it gives you such delight as having had in your repertoire?
Oh, golly. I mean, I have really loved being able to switch back and forth. There are things about film and television which are exciting and very immediate and, you know, solving problems very quickly. And there's something wonderful about working with theater, because when you're in theater, I mean, in film, people get hired with almost no experience, and working in theater, people often have a long history of training and experience, and can take a moment to be more thoughtful about what they're putting out. But ultimately, what draws me to both is that you create this incredibly wonderful and intense team of people. I mean, it is that found family thing, is you find the people who you love working with, who really take your creative voice to the next level, and really create a space where you can make your art, and that is something that translates across both mediums. So from that point of view, like, yes, both. But ultimately, I chose to leave Los Angeles and to spend my time in theater, because there is a certain care taken in theater that is there for the art of it, as opposed to like, we're just doing this for a paycheck. I mean, no one's doing theater for a paycheck. I mean, we do, and I am deeply thankful that I am able to make my living from doing theater. I am incredibly privileged, but ultimately, you know, if people are there, they're there because they care about what they're doing, as opposed to, you know, doing a commercial for Pfizer. Like, this is something that you do because you want to be here, and that's also part of why I teach, is teaching at a university level. Your students are there because they care about what the subject matter is, and that gives you the opportunity to really set them on fire about it, to really take them to the next level, to watch them kind of bloom. So that's exciting.
Nice.
Oh, thanks.
Well, the costume designer doesn't often receive applause the way the performers do, but thank you, Phoebe. This was marvelous.
Thanks. Well, thank you for coming out. This was lovely.
Yeah, I feel like this is the third one we've done, and every time it comes over me anew that it's just how much, I don't know, I miss the art, and what a joy it is to be able to speak about it and be in conversation with you all. So thanks so much. Oh yes, Bo wanted to mention, and John, I know you have particular interest because you were very generous to us after the preview of House Arrest. The big pins and needles, we're gonna announce it more widely, but we had put in a request for the rights for Anna Deavere Smith's documentary theater piece House Arrest about the American presidency. And usually requests for rights turn around in like a day or two, because we all know how that goes. But in this period of coronavirus, where what we're requesting is not to do a live performance, but to do something streamed, these things take more time. So after 3 weeks of waiting, the rights company Dramatis actually got back to us after talking to the playwright's agents. And they are, we have gotten the rights to stream House Arrest, and we worked out the details. So we're really excited. So we're putting together a team including, you know, costume design, maybe from the waist up, Phoebe's part. And we're gonna announce auditions for actors to do a series of monologues, and then we'll film it safely and socially distanced at the End Center and edit it together on a pretty rapid fire production process in time to be able to stream it to audiences October 20th through November 1st. So essentially the 2 last weekends in October, which is great because it's both Arts Month in October. So to be able to offer something to our community for Arts Month. And then also great because it is, when we close on Sunday, November 1st, it'll be 2 days before the 2020 presidential election. So it will certainly feel topical. And we've got more fun things planned around it. I've been talking to the good people at the library and a wonderful professor in anthropology, Kimbra Smith, about also doing some local interviews around this theme of elections here in the Springs, and putting together a little bit of a companion piece to accompany Anna DeVere Smith's work of local documentary theater, local interviews that we then use for documentary theater pieces. So exciting things are brewing for October, and folks will hear more about it soon, because literally the details are all falling in place over the last 24 hours. That's what I know.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Very exciting. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for your continued support. We wouldn't be able to do this fall without your support. We're always grateful. And Phoebe, thanks for joining. This was very cool. And I'm looking forward to going down your Pinterest rabbit hole. I mostly have like landscaping things on mine, so I'm going to have to like dig into the costume design world. So
yes. Pinterest
Very
is
cool.
a wonderful and dangerous tool.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks everyone. We'll do this again next month.
Thank you.
Bye, lovely
Bye.
folks. Bye.